Speaking of Occupy Wall Street, and I'm going to talk about it again just because it annoys the White House so much that we do. Occupy Wall Street has reached 1,500 cities that we're aware of. There were a whole bunch of maps being posted that are supposed to be looking at tweets about Occupy whatever to try and map out where it is. I know they're not complete. They don't register Honolulu. And I know there's an Occupy Honolulu. We were there. I put up videos about it. By the way, speaking of that, our local TV station, KITV, has this feature. Submit your local photos and videos, of life here in Hawaii. And so I submitted the short version of my video for Occupy Honolulu. It went up this morning, and then just before airtime, I got a nice little email from the Hearst Corporation saying, we're sorry, but your video is not appropriate to the news media for Honolulu, even though it was obviously a news story. I guess what they wanted was like more hula girls and stuff like that we're all supposed to feel good about. And all I can say is the Hearst newspapers are continuing to live down to the reputation of their founder, Mr. You get the pictures and I'll give you the war. Another article we put up there on whatreallyhappened.com. It's New Year's Eve. No, it's Occupy Times Square. And the gist of the story is basically that when you walk into Times Square right now with all the Occupy protesters there, it's just as crowded as it is for New Year's. And that's a crowd. That's definitely a crowd here. And, it's all these people. And what really gives the lie to all this propaganda that it's communists and it's Muslims and it's anti-Semites and it's Republicans and it's Democrats is that it's everybody's out there. Those Occupy protesters, they're the young, they're the old, they're the women, they're the men, they're the gays, they're the straights, they're black, they're white, they're me, they're you. This idea that some dark conspiracy has enough political clout to mobilize this many people in the streets of America is absurd, because anybody who had that popular support, whether it's Obama or Ron Paul or Ahmadinejad or whoever, if they had that much popular support, they wouldn't need Occupy America. They wouldn't need to stage this kind of a protest. This is a genuine, popular uprising, a leaderless resistance, and that's why they can't get a handle on it. We're going to talk a little bit more about this when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about Occupy America, Occupy the world. It's everywhere, including Antarctica, the Arctic Circle, up there on the tundra. I love that photo with the 3 little dogs there. And you know something? These demonstrations have already accomplished something truly amazing, because a little over a month ago, when Claire and I went to New York City for the anniversary, the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and we were telling people where we were going and what we were doing, their voice would lower. Anybody we're talking to, and their voice would lower and say, oh, yeah, I guess you're one of those conspiracy people, right? And I'm good, well, yeah, that's what we do. We got kicked out of Hollywood twice, so, radio, talk radio, and website development, that's what we do now. It's actually a little bit less stressful than visual effects. Now, just a little over a month later, and by the way, this is the 1-month anniversary of the start of Occupy Wall Street. Now, anywhere you go, you talk about what's going on, and everybody's, yeah, it's about time for a revolution here. We got to get out the guillotines and stuff. Down at the supermarket just this morning, we're talking to people about what's going on and saying, yeah, this government's got to go. It's really high time. It's out in the open. Occupy America has already accomplished one of the most important things that's necessary to do to effect change, which is to let the general public understand that defiance against the money junkies is socially acceptable behavior. All that civics training you got in grade school and everything about, oh, you must salute the flag and pledge allegiance, and, you never speak up to the government, and you never say anything treasonous or seditious or, well, it's out there now. All of these demonstrations everywhere in every city, standing up there with their signs, nobody is left believing that opposition to the government is a minority opinion. The polls that are coming out there, the overwhelming majority of Americans support the Occupy movement. The rest either work for the federal government or they're too cowardly to basically get their heads out of various portions of their anatomy. Remember what I told you about those who got seduced over that line saying torture is okay on the Muslims? Those are the ones they'll never turn around and go back. They will go to their graves the most fanatically supportive of the federal government. They have to be right, because if the federal government's wrong, then I was wrong to support torture, and I'm never wrong. So I'm going to wrap that flag around and just we've all seen them, crazies like that. And you can't change your mind. You're just going to have to let them go off and live their lives. When I worked in Munich many, many years ago, back in the 1980s, there were still these derelicts around left over from the Nazis, and in between mumbling about spare change, you were always saying, Hitler was misunderstood. He was really a very good guy, and he could dance the pants off of Winston Churchill. And we're going to have that whole crop of that this time. All these people who got seduced into going along with torture and war crimes and preemptive bombing and everything, and they're never going to be able to look in the mirror at themselves ever again. So they're the ones out there, they answer the poll saying, yes, the government is right. No matter what the government says, the government is right. And we can ignore them because they're a dwindling minority. The majority of the American people are with Occupy America. It is now considered not only socially acceptable, but polite and even fashionable to talk about getting rid of the money junkies. There'll be no going back from that. There is nothing the government and the money junkies can do that's going to reverse that public opinion. They might terrorize people into staying silent, but that's not the same thing as changing their beliefs. That's just not going to happen. As a matter of fact, Occupy Wall Street is very pro-capitalist. They are anti-fascist. Occupy Wall Street is not anti-American. They're trying to get back to the real American dream. Occupy Wall Street understands that the country as it is run today is neither American nor capitalist nor free, and that's what they're opposing. And the fascists, the money junkies, are all trying to wave commies at us because they don't want to let the discussion get into whether we're still actually capitalist or not, because we're not. In a capitalist society, all those Wall Street firms would have been allowed to crash from the mortgage-backed security fraud, and those people would be in prison right now, just as they did over in Iceland. And so everybody who's trying to protect the money junkies and to protect their privilege and to protect their paychecks and everything, they're out there screaming, they're all commies or they're anti-Semites or they're this or that, because they're trying to find some way to derail this thing without actually having to discuss what the issues really are. And that, of course, is, Occupy Wall Street is not anti-capitalist, they're anti-fascist, because Wall Street itself has become a fascist economic machine, just as Lenin predicted would happen when capitalism failed. We didn't go to socialism. We went past socialism so fast, we didn't even have time to wave at it. We went right from capitalism into fascism, and that's what Occupy Wall Street is opposed to. They want to get back to a capitalist state. They want to get back to what America used to be. They want freedom. They want the freedom to work and keep what they earn for themselves, not have it taxed away to give to Israel, to give to Wall Street, now to give to Europe's banks, and certainly not to a private central bank that by design creates more debt than currency to keep us permanent slaves. That was never intended for the United States of America. The Congress and the President who sold us into the slavery of a private central bank committed an act of treason. It's not constitutional. The Federal Reserve Act did not even have the required constitutional amendment to change that part of the Constitution saying who's in charge of monetary policy. It's like in fact, there were a pair of resolutions there. There was the Federal Reserve Act, which unconstitutionally transferred monetary policy to the private central bank, and there was the 16th Amendment, which wasn't even properly ratified, and even if it had been, did not revoke the earlier constitutional prohibitions against a private income tax. It's for that reason that, there have been Supreme Court decisions saying the 16th Amendment doesn't actually authorize a new tax. Because there is a rule, the Constitution has to make sense within itself. It can't contradict itself. Aaron, stay on the phone. We'll be back after these commercials.
We will not go down.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm trading messages in the chat room where they're talking about how certain alternative media individuals are attempting to portray themselves as spokespersons or leaders for Occupy America and to basically say, well, what they really want is insert agenda here. And I was just pointing out the fun part about a leaderless resistance is it makes a total clown out of anybody trying to pretend that they're the leader. Because they get out there and say, yes, we're doing this and we're doing that, and everybody behind's completely ignoring them. It is a true leader's resistance. It's like trying to get hold of a cloud. It's not going to work. Not going to work here. So anyway, all these demonstrations all across the country, I mean, nobody got on a phone or an email list and contacted millions of America and said, we're all going to stand up and be ticked off. The reality is all of America is already ticked off. They just didn't realize it applied to everybody else around them. And as soon as this movement got going, there was a resonance in the general population, and they all stood up. This is not a plot by the Republicans or by the Democrats or by the Muslims or by the Illuminati or the Freemasons or the Templars. Anybody who had that kind of political influence to get this many people into the streets of America all at the same time doesn't need to do it. This is a spontaneous expression of rage in the American people, and it's not going to go away. It has been decades building to this point. It will not be switched off easily. As the conditions continue to deteriorate in this country, everybody understands what the real problem is. It's this private central bank that was never supposed to be part of the United States government. It is the government which allowed it to happen, not once but 3 times, with disastrous consequences every single time. And the American people understand that. And they're not going to be distracted and said, oh, you need to blame these people, and you need to blame these people. And all these attempts at division are not working. Somebody put out an article early today saying, who's to blame for the economic mess? Is it Wall Street or Washington, D.C.? And my reply is both. You know, and arguing over whose neck gets the shortest rope and the tallest tree is a complete waste of time, and it's pointless. They're both guilty. Of course, each one is standing there starting to point the fingers at the other. The government's saying, oh, Wall Street did it. We're innocent. We're on your side. That's what Obama's doing. He's out there pointing fingers at Wall Street. And by the way, he's still getting tons of money from them. But for the purposes of the election and the TV news, he's going to stand there and he's going to wag his finger at Wall Street and say, you people were bad. Wall Street, meanwhile, is turning around and saying, you let us do it. You took the rules and regulations off. Securities Exchange Commission was supposed to keep an eye on us. They didn't do anything. We figured what we're doing is fine. So they're passing the blame back and forth. And they'd love to get you arguing over who is to blame for the mess. And the answer is, we're not going to argue over who was to blame. We're not going to get sucked into these artificial debates. They're both to blame for it. All of Wall Street's to blame. All of Washington, D.C. is to blame. Okay? Your question's answered. Let's move forward and decide what we're going to do about it. I don't think the Occupy America movement should all of a sudden decide it's going to be a political party. That is exactly what the existing system wants them to do, to co-opt them into coming back into the status quo. That's how they hijacked the Tea Party. The Occupy America movement is about serious, fundamental, structural change to America, getting rid of the private central bank, getting rid of a corrupt federal government, and saying we want to hit the reset button and start over. If they get turned around and said, oh, we're going to back a candidate, then the media can dismiss them. The government can say, well, we just barely got out of that one. They're just another political fringe group, and we can ignore them because the laws are set up to only allow Republicans and Democrats to dominate Congress and Washington, D.C. and the White House. So I think it would be a huge, huge mistake for the Occupy movement to get tied up with any party or any candidate. And that's coming from, somebody who really wants Ron Paul to get in there. But the system is not going to allow it to happen.
Point.
The system is not going to allow it to happen.
That's a good...
We have to do what the Russian republics did. When the USSR collapsed, and I feel the United States government is on the verge of the same kind of a collapse, the first thing they did is they kicked out all the oligarchs. That's the Russian word for Wall Street CEO. These people who just believe that the world exists to make them incredibly rich on the backs of everybody else around them, by gaming the system. We get rid of the oligarchs and we start a whole new republic. I think in this age of electronic communication, we don't even really need a Congress. We just need a small, tiny administrative body to make sure the roads get built and the schools stay open. And all the big decisions, like whether we're going to use taxpayer money to save, the bankers from their own criminality, get put to a massive national popular vote. Because I know that if every nation on earth got rid of their legislative bodies and had direct participatory democracy on the issue of going to war, there would be no more wars. If you put the question of war in Iran to a popular vote, they wouldn't get it. If you had put the question of war in Iraq to a popular vote, they never would have gotten it. We are in 10 wars right now, going on 11, none of which would have passed a popular vote in this country. And so you need to understand that government in Washington, D.C. is never, ever, ever going to do what the people want them to do. They haven't in a long, long time. They're out of practice. Their attitude is, it's not up to you to decide where the country is going. They're on a path to world domination, and they can't turn around because they've gone too far. If they quit now, it's all coming down. Personally, I think it's all coming down anyway, but they're still holding out that whatever invisible man they worship up in the clouds is somehow going to give them a miracle where they can go through and conquer the world and make it safe for compound interest.